So welcome to the Why I Love podcast. This is episode 2, technically. I'm still going to call that first little intro just episode 0, so episode 2. And this episode is about the original Xbox console. So it's going to be a little bit tricky doing this one because this was one of the first things that I thought about when I thought about doing a podcast. But at the same time, it's hard to talk about a console without talking about its games. But a lot of those games are going to be games that I want to do a whole podcast on because I just love them that much. But I think hopefully with the original Xbox, there's enough for me to talk about to fill a little podcast because it's one of my favourite consoles. I think it probably is still my favourite console ever. And I know that's a very hard thing to say because I can think of amazing things about every console I've owned. But hopefully this podcast is going to explain to you all sort of just why it's my favourite. I'm not saying it's the best, it's just my best. So the weird thing about the original Xbox is that I almost didn't buy one. I remember getting a Nintendo magazine and reading about what at the time they were calling the Star Cube, which most of you probably know went on to become the GameCube. And this was really new to me. I'd never kind of been part of knowing about a new console before it came out or was marketed. I didn't know consoles had code names. I didn't know magazines learnt about them before. This all sounds so stupid now, but I remember being really excited about this as a kid and thinking, oh, I've got to get this. Like, the N64 was incredible. I absolutely love it. I love Nintendo now. Like, before that, I was sort of a Sega kid a little bit. I had a Master System. My friends all had Mega Drives because they're European and Nintendo wasn't as popular over here. But now I felt like I was really sort of a Nintendo person, I really liked all the games. So when I read about the Star Cube, I was just really excited about getting one. And yeah, that was almost it. I was pretty much decided. Like I say, I was a kid, I didn't have that much money, but I thought, I've got a while till this thing's supposed to come out, so I'll start saving up. I don't think any of this was going to be a sort of Christmas present from somebody. It was just going to be something that I was buying. Now, I'd never bought a games console before properly. I sort of, as a kid, I bought a Master System, but that's a different story. I mean, I think it cost about 30 quid. The Mega Drive had probably been out 4 years or something when I got it, but I didn't know any better. I was very young. So this was like the first real time that I was going to buy a console. It wasn't a birthday present. This was going to be mine. This felt special somehow. It was like I was going to buy my own console with my own money, and there is something great about that. So like I say, I was pretty much sold on getting this Star Cube thing. So I was getting all the Nintendo magazines and reading about it and was really excited and wanted to find out more. So I thought, I know, there's this new thing called the internet. I'll go and have a look, see if there's any more news on it. Although the internet had been around a while, so much of the internet was still new to me. I talked in the last podcast about looking up cheats and things on websites, and that was about as far as it really went, I think. At this point, I'm a little bit older. I think I'm probably about 15, so I was using the internet for more than just looking up cheat code. That sounded pretty dodgy. I didn't mean that. I mean, that obviously was happening because I was a 15-year-old boy, but I still don't really think I was using it for the news, and I didn't know about sort of games websites really. I think I probably knew about like some of the major ones, but even then I wasn't really like going on them often or anything. But I started looking up the GameCube, finding more out about it, trying to see, secrets, rumours, all these things, and got pretty excited. But then around that time, suddenly I heard of this thing called the DirectX Xbox. So that was Microsoft's code name at the time for the Xbox. And I remember not really being that interested in it. Like I say, I was still Nintendo. The Star Cube was the thing that was interesting to me. But over time, I kind of started hearing more about the Xbox and saw some screenshots of the things that they thought they'd be able to do on it. And it was pretty mind-blowing. I remember thinking the graphics looked stunning. One day I went on the internet and our homepage was just always set to the BBC website. And I remember just seeing this story on the BBC, something like Xbox blueprints leak. And the idea of this stuff being leaked was just made it cool somehow to me. I was really excited. I wanted to read all about it. I didn't understand any of it, It was just all RAM and processor speeds and things like that. But at the bottom of the article, it just said the source where the leak had come from. So I clicked on this link and it took me to this website, Xbox 365. And I think that's where I sort of first discovered sort of fan web pages. And as we go through this podcast, I think what you're going to hear is the reason I love the Xbox isn't so much because of the console or even the games. I mean, the games were brilliant, but it's all the gaming culture and everything that comes along with consoles that, for me, a lot of this was like the first time I discovered that. So it was really exciting. So I went on this Xbox 365 website. So I was going back through all the news pages, reading everything that they'd written on this site, and I just thought this site was so cool. I was blown away. Like, they had all these secrets, they had all these rumors. Probably most of it probably turned out to be rubbish, but you know, I thought this was incredible. And then I found out that they had a forum, and I don't think I'd ever been on a forum before. I don't think I really knew what they were. Anyway, I quickly learned sort of how to sign up and got on there, and this was great. Like, suddenly there was all these people who were really excited about this games console to talk to, and I didn't know any of them, but it was cool. Like, we all just had this thing in common, that we were all really excited about this machine that none of us knew anything about. So every day I'd check this forum, and I think that was one of the first things that kind of started my love for the Xbox, really. I mean, it introduced me to internet forums. Like, I'm not a person who goes on forums anymore, but I did spend a lot of my teen years on forums, and that's where it all began. I remember answering a request to become a moderator on the forum, and I was a naive kid. When I got told I could be a moderator, a little bit of me thought that it was maybe a job. Like, I wasn't sure if I was going to get paid or if I was going to have to go to America. This is all, you know, I sound stupid now, and maybe I was stupid then. I was 15, but the internet was still quite new. Like, all this stuff was really weird, and none of my friends kind of spent time in forums or anything like that, so it wasn't a thing that I could really talk to anyone about. So I became a moderator. I ended up spending years and years in that forum, but I think that was the thing that turned it for me, because I went from wanting a GameCube and maybe once every month being able to read a magazine about it, to having a place where I could go every day, and there was just a whole group of people who were really excited for this thing, and they were all talking about it, and we were like this little community. And from then on, I think it was obvious I was going to buy an Xbox. So this wasn't the only console that I'd ever kind of bought with my own money, but it was the first console that I bought at launch, and I was just thinking about this today, but I think it's actually the only console I've ever bought at launch. I mean, I got my N64, was probably a couple of years in. I said earlier about the Master System. I mean, that was years and years later. And since then, I mean, I've bought a 360, PlayStation 3, Xbox One, but all of them either a couple of months after launch or waited for the first price drop. With PlayStation 3, it was right at the end of its life. I just kind of picked one up cheap and went back and bought all the games that I feel like I'd missed out on. So really, this is the only games console I've ever bought at launch. But I was so glad that I did. Launch games now just seem to be a thing of the past, really. Like, you get a bunch of games that no one's really that bothered about. Companies throw out games that are sort of half-arsed, knowing that people will buy them. Or this new trend of taking games from the last generation and porting them over. But with the Xbox, it was starting afresh, and they didn't have the luxury of just launching with kind of half-arsed games, because the PlayStation 2 was huge. It was really successful. They had to have that big hitter, and they did. I mean, they had Halo. So Halo is one of these games that's a tricky one to talk about, because I'm definitely going to end up doing a podcast about that. I have a huge history with that franchise, especially that first game. What a launch title. You cannot beat that for a launch title. I mean, we're probably like 15 years on now from the original Xbox, and Halo is still a huge property. You know, it might not be as big as it was, but it's still huge, and that wouldn't have happened without that original game. And I don't think the Xbox would have happened without that game. I honestly think the Xbox might have just died in the water, really, if Halo hadn't been there. And I was so glad, because I had spent so much time following that game and getting really, really excited. And it's not often that you get so hyped up for something and spend so much money just to play something. And this is me, who I enjoyed GoldenEye and I liked Perfect Dark, but I'd never been a big shooter fan or anything, so to spend all that for this console and for Microsoft to rely so heavily on a shooter, it had all the hallmarks of me being totally crushed in disappointment. And to make things worse, really, like, the Xbox came out in the UK, it cost £300. To me now that would be a lot of money, which is why I kind of always stay back a little bit from launches. But for a 15-year-old, £300 was a hell of a lot of money. But I was not disappointed. And for those who don't know, in Europe and the UK, after, I think it was only about a month, I don't know what happened, Xbox sales must have just nosedived after the launch, because it went from from £300 to £199. Now you might think that for a kid who's just spent £300 on a machine, that would be really frustrating, I'd be really pissed off. But I didn't care. I thought I'd got value for money with this thing because it was so powerful. It was so much more powerful than any PC I'd ever had. The graphics were stunning. Halo was incredible. I think I also had Munch's Odyssey, which I remember that game starting and I thought I was looking at a cutscene and I thought maybe it had frozen, and then I pressed forward and realised I could move, and that game was beautiful. So they cut the price by £100, and I remember, I'm not sure how it happened, I think maybe you got a letter or you had to email or something, but Microsoft did a deal for everybody who bought one in the UK. You could get 2 games and a controller to make up for that £100. So here's me thinking that I've just spent £300 and bought this amazing console, and suddenly this company who I bought it from want to give me 2 new games and an extra controller, which has just saved me loads of money. So suddenly, this game that I think is incredible, my friend can play with me too, and this list of games that I can pick 2 games from has 2 games that I kind of wanted to play anyway. So I didn't feel hard done by. I kind of felt like I was getting an even better deal than the one I thought I already had. Looking back at it now, it's weird. I can't really imagine this happening today. I know something similar happened with the DS. I think they kind of gave a few old Game Boy games or something, Game Boy Advance games. But I don't think there's ever been that big a drop in value of a games console's price in such a short space of time. But I think it might have had something to do with the fact that the GameCube was going to launch soon, and that had been priced at £150. I think it was a wise move by Microsoft. They probably lost a lot of money doing it, but it made them competitive, and they had to be. I mean, the PlayStation 2 is, I think, the best ever selling console. They were never going to beat it, but they had to make a dent at least with this. And Nintendo had the history. I mean, this was Nintendo coming off the N64, which maybe had underperformed in some people's eyes. It was still a fantastic console, so Microsoft were really going to have to compete. But they had more than just the price cut up their sleeves, because Microsoft had Xbox Live on the way, and for people like me who were following the system, Xbox Live was going to be huge. Now I know there's some PC gamers probably listening to this who are thinking, you know, we were playing online well before this, and we had voice. Xbox made you pay to have Xbox Live and all that kind of stuff, and I understand that, but for most people, PC gaming online just wasn't really accessible, and the idea that one of the consoles was going to make that accessible was really exciting to me. So I got signed up to the beta, and then they would send you in the post like a headset and a CD that had like the update on. And that was just really cool, like being part of this sort of new thing. And I remember putting the disc in, and it seems mad now with the amount of updates that consoles have, but the idea of updating your console, that was cool. That was really new. Like, you know, N64s were this amazing thing, but they were solid, they never changed. And suddenly you could put this disc in, and then you'd go to the dashboard, which had been the same for 10 months or whatever of the Xbox, and then there was this whole new menu there. And I am a bit of a weirdo when it comes to menus and stuff. I love going in settings menus and looking at all the different options, and having this like brand new menu and having this brand new option and a marketplace. I mean, the idea that you were going to be able to buy things online through your games console, and it was all so new. And yeah, this sounds crazy, but hopefully you all remember this and you know how different it was at the time. So I'm not sure what the first game I played on Xbox Live is, but I do remember the first time I played Ghost Recon on Live, and I think that was the first kind of real game that I played on there. I didn't know anybody else at the time with Xbox Live, so I didn't have any like real life friends on there or anything. And I just went into a game, I didn't know what to expect, and I got thrown onto the embassy level. And it might not quite have gone down this way. There's a good chance that I probably just played some games and died a lot, and my brain's kind of wiped those ones out. But I like to remember this game, and I think this was the first game I ever had. I got chucked into the embassy level, and that level's kind of set around this embassy in a city, you're down these little back alleys and things. And I remember starting with my team in this alleyway. I was about to run out, and I noticed that like one of the guys had stopped at the corner, so I lined up behind him, kind of waited, thinking he must have seen somebody. And suddenly over the headset, this American voice came on. Now, he was probably about 18, and he probably just said, "I'll do some shooting, and you guys run over there." But this is how I heard it. "Okay, Marines, I'm gonna start giving covering fire, and all you guys haul ass now! Go, go, go!" I was blown away by this. it sounds stupid, but at 15, obviously there'd been loads of American people on TV and watching Friends and all things like that. But just to be talking to someone in America was amazing. To be talking to this American guy who to me felt like an adult, and he was talking like a soldier, and he was commanding us all, and we all did it. And it was brilliant, and we were running around, and we were taking cover, and we were acting like soldiers, and it felt not real, like it obviously was just a game, but it felt amazing. It felt like what it would be like to be in like a squad of Marines, and no game had just felt like that before to me. And I was blown away by this. I remember thinking, this is incredible. Oh my god, all I'm going to do is play on Xbox Live now. This is so good. And the shine wore off, but to have that as your opening experience, and to have an incredible match, and incredible players, and all people talking, and Xbox Live back then was brilliant, because you had to be 18, you had to have a credit card, you had to have a fair bit of money, you had to have broadband, which was rare, especially in the UK, and that weeded out a lot of kids at first, and a lot of people who would just go on to troll people, or to ruin games, or to not really try. So everyone on there was really dedicated, and really interested, and really excited, and it was a great community at the start. Everybody wanted to use headsets, and they weren't just sort of talking to people in the room with them, or playing music through them, or all the horrible things that you get online now. They were using them to sort of roleplay almost, to pretend they were soldiers, or even if they weren't role-playing, they were just using it to communicate in games and make friends, and it was really nice. Now, over that time of having the original Xbox, I played quite a few games online. I mean, one other that really stands out to me is Midtown Madness 3. I think this game was quite an early Xbox Live game, and it was really unique because you kind of had the odd few little sort of party game things, and then you had shooters, but there wasn't really a game like Midtown, which was more sort of a community game. Yeah, it was a racer, and there were some people on there just having races, but a lot of it was just about having an open world to drive around in together and make friends and chat. People would share secrets and glitches and try and break the game together, and people would try and make their own games, and I know that's quite commonplace now, and a lot of devs try to encourage that with the game's design, but I don't remember it being a big thing really back then, because you didn't have that collaboration. And so for me, this was like a really incredible new experience that I'd never really had before. And at this point as well, a couple of my close friends at the time also had an Xbox, and they'd got Xbox Live. So suddenly I could play one of these games with people that I knew, and that was a whole new thing. Like, I remember just spending a whole of a summer once just online, just all day, and we would just be driving around chatting. It was like having a kind of chat room that you could play, and we would just mess around in there and chat, and I think sometimes we'd like sing songs and come up with stupid jokes and just weird stuff, but it was great. And one thing that I really remember about Midtown, that me and my friends from back then, we still joke about this sometimes, was a game mode that we stumbled across once, purely by chance. We entered one of the worlds, and somebody said to us, just so you know, we're all playing real rules in here. And this, still to this day, baffles me really why people would want to do this, but we just stumbled across a load of people who were playing Midtown Madness by driving around at the correct speed limits of the roads. And then some people would be police officers, and if they saw somebody breaking the law, they could go and arrest them, but otherwise they couldn't touch them. And the idea was just to try and drive and not crash into people. And really bizarre, but it just kind of showed like how widespread this game went. I mean, you could go in one world and they would playing real rules, and then go in another and they were just playing pure cops and robbers, or just trying to race from one end of the map to the other as fast as they could. And you can't really talk about Xbox Live without mentioning Halo 2. Again, I'm kind of reluctant, because when I talk about Halo, I think I'll talk about it as the franchise. So Halo 2 is definitely coming up in that. But all I have to say is Halo 2 shaped Xbox Live into what it is now, and it was really special. And I think that time of playing Halo, playing Midtown Madness, Ghost Recon, that was definitely my favourite time playing online. I'm not really an online gamer now, but I have so many great memories of that, and Halo 2 is a huge part of that. But yeah, I'll probably talk about that in another podcast. So outside of Xbox Live, there was just some magnificent single-player games as well. And again, some of these are games that I don't really want to talk too much about, but I can't do a podcast on the Xbox and not mention them. So the original Splinter Cell blew my mind graphically, gameplay wise. Yeah, a podcast is coming on Splinter Cell because I'm still a huge fan of that franchise. And then Knights of the Old Republic. I mean, I probably won't do a podcast on Knights because it's been so long since I've played it. I can't remember that much of it anymore. I think that was the first RPG that I ever properly got into. I definitely played a few on the PC, but never really understood them and didn't really get suckered in. But, Knights of the Old Republic. It's one of those games that's probably too old to go back and play now if you haven't played it before and you don't have the nostalgia for it. But, I really hope they sort of remake it or do a sequel. And the original Xbox was the first console that I ever played Pro Evo on as well. That series is still with me to this day. I still regularly have friends round, we do Master Leagues together and do co-op and things like that. And one of the other games on the Xbox that I think really made me fall hard for this console, and it's a weird one because I actually ended up hating the game, it's the first Fable game. So after getting involved in the forums around the Xbox, I've learnt about Fable and got really, really excited. I remember every single screenshot, every video would get me really, really excited for this game. Even now, looking back at some of those original screenshots that they released. Yeah, there's a lot about them now that looks out of date, but I can totally see why I was excited because they did look stunning. And the game never ended up looking like that, obviously. It was concept images that they were hoping they would be able to get to, but it totally drew me in, and I sort of went from just being in these Xbox forums to specifically going to the Fable forums. Although a lot of people will probably think of Fable as being Lionhead. It was actually kind of like a satellite studio there, it's called Big Blue Box, who was making the original game, and it was their forums that I almost ended up living in at some point. Now, I ended up getting so into the idea of playing Fable that I actually applied to do work experience at Lionhead. Now, this was quite a few years after the Xbox had come out. I think I was about sort of 17 or something. I think my parents were kind of impressed that I'd pushed to get this and sort of been asked to go along. But I don't think they really understood it. But I mean, my parents are amazing and they went along with it. They booked a holiday to Guildford, took me along with them, and they spent a week seeing sights in Guildford, and I would spend a week getting up every morning and going to Lionhead Studios and playing Fable. So the game had just gone gold when I arrived, so I pretty much just got to play like the finished version of Fable before anyone else. That might sound like every kid's dream, and it kind of was, but I think with this one, I'd got too hyped up. I remember even before I went, like so much more of the game had been revealed, and there was a really negative atmosphere on the forums because the game just wasn't what everyone had expected and hoped. But it was still an amazing experience. I mean, I remember standing maybe about a foot away from Peter Molyneux once and just kind of being really, really excited because I was near this guy who had been reading interviews about for ages and watching video clips of and hearing him wax lyrical on all these stupid, crazy ideas that he had for this game that never ended up being in it. So although I kind of came away a bit disappointed from testing Fable, I think that ultimately ended up shaping where I went in life, because I went from that summer straight to uni where I was studying film and TV. But after the kind of first year, I'd already decided that I wanted to work in games, and I think going to Lionhead was part of that, sort of seeing a studio and seeing how it all worked. So I ended up persuading my tutors to let me write about games instead of film, and I did my dissertation on The Sims, and then when I came out of university, I just wanted to work in video games, so I looked for the first company around, which being from Liverpool meant going to work at Sony, so I ended up getting a job testing at Sony for a couple of years. Now I don't work in games anymore, but that ended up being like a big part of my life, and I don't think I ever would have had any of that without the Xbox. Like, that huge interest in not just the console, but all the culture around it kind of shaped where I went and what jobs I got, because it sort of inflamed this excitement about the games culture and learning all about the industry and studios and how things work. And before that, I'd just never really had anything I was that interested in. But like I say, it wasn't just the games with the Xbox. It wasn't even just the culture. It was also the system itself. I mean, now, like, I have an Xbox One, and I like to keep really up to date with gaming news, and I like to follow all the different consoles and different developers. But the Xbox One just kind of sits under my TV, and it does what I need it to do. I'm never really that interested in the actual box itself. But with the original Xbox, that was so different. I mean, This is the first console where I learned that consoles could be hacked and modded, and this is the first console I ever opened and took apart. One of my friends modded his console. I remember I was going to try and paint mine and style it in a certain way, and I actually had a couple of versions of the Xbox as well, because for those who had one, you probably remember, like, the DVD drives would often break on them. So I ended up knowing about, like, the best DVD drive to have, and how to look for certain numbers on the box to see what sort of parts you had inside and what drives you had and things like that. And then beyond that as well, I even owned a book all about the Xbox. And if you haven't read this book, I totally recommend it. It's called Opening the Xbox, and it's by a guy called Dean Takahashi, I think. And this was brilliant. I mean, it dives into the whole background of how the console was made, the teams involved, going back to sort of Bill Gates' original vision for the console and why Microsoft even wanted to get into the market. All of that was fascinating. And I even remember, like, writing one of my best school projects on the Xbox, and in CDT, like, building a Halo themed table for gaming. And, you know, this is how absorbed I got into this system. But then, just like that, the Xbox was dead. Microsoft had made the decision that they wanted to launch the 360 before the PlayStation 3. And as sad as it was, I mean, they made the right decision. The 360 was hugely successful. It was the console of that generation. But it always felt to me that they kind of did a little bit of a disservice to such a fantastic console. And like I've said in previous podcasts, I know there's huge amounts of nostalgia here. And maybe for people older than me or people younger than me, the Xbox just looks like any old system. But it was my system, and as much as I've liked consoles since, I don't think I'll ever love one of them quite as much as I did the original Xbox.